Story 1. Freshman English. Busted a kid for plagiarism. He was furious and refused to drop the course. I gave him a second chance. And he continued to plagiarize. He was a slimy, smarmy kid who thought I was just a dumb, clueless TA. But joke's on him. He ended up failing the course 3 ways: plagiarizing, exceeding absences, and failing to turn in a complete final. You can argue about one way to get an F. You can't argue about 3. Story 2. I interned in a class with this kid who always thought he was smarter than everyone else. He was pretty smart, but not by too much. He always got paired with kids not as smart as him. So he would always be really smug when dealing with them. We learned he got that from his parents during a parent-teacher conference. His parents praised that boy up and down and thought he was the smartest kid in the school. They built him up as that, and they got him thinking that too. Then they went off on my mentor teacher. She wasn't providing him with higher enough education. She was bringing him down. She was terrible. The conference ended when my mentor teacher left the room crying after the verbal lashing. Well, about a week later, there was an event where parents came to watch their children in class. It was to watch them do math games with other students. Well, my mentor teacher paired this smug little bastard with the actual smartest kid in class, the one who was working on more advanced classes after school. The kid got shamed. His parents were so flustered during the event. They were very visibly nervous and upset, looking as this kid got destroyed game after game. They left before it was all done and took him out of school for the rest of the day. Story 3. Freshman English. Busted a kid for plagiarism. He was furious and refused to drop the course. I gave him a second chance. And he continued to plagiarize. He was a slimy, smarmy kid who thought I was just a dumb, clueless TA. But joke's on him. He ended up failing the course 3 ways: plagiarizing, exceeding absences, and failing to turn in a complete final. You can argue about one way to get an F. You can't argue about 3. Story 4. Sister told me this story. Teacher kept a pack of Oreos behind the whiteboard, and when he would walk out of the class, students would jump and grab some and eat them before he came back. Teacher noticed, so he put really hot sauce inside the Oreos and left on purpose, came back in, and the kids who stole the cookies were left heavily breathing and sweating. They never stole cookies again. Story 5. Have another one. We had these 2 kids, a brother-sister combo with fabulous names. Let's call them Princess and Major. Actually not bad kids, just a little lazy, but the parents were the laziest ones. Did anything to not work, just sit around and exist. I'm surprised they had the motivation to get off their butts and procreate. Twice. Anyway, there was always some excuse why homework wasn't done. And this was 4th grade, inner city, so homework was crap like reading a little booklet to your folks or practicing multiplication facts. The kids also missed school all the time. The kids were honest. Mommy didn't want to wake up and get us ready for the bus. Daddy was up late with his friends, so we report them to truancy. They turn around and find some lawyer to sue the school for their kids' underachievement. If the teachers were doing their jobs, these precious children would be pre-med students by now. Luckily, we kept really good records. The lawyer shows up, the principal, superintendent, truancy officer, our lawyer. Their lawyer starts in. Our principal breaks in, holds up his hand. Asks the truancy officer, how many days have these children missed? Ends up they'd missed enough days in the last 3 years to equate more than a year of school. Principal says, now ma'am, sir, how are we supposed to deliver a quality education to your children if you don't get them to school? Their lawyer quietly packed up her crap and left. Story 6. I teach college students to be teachers. My first year doing this, I had a student who was always late, turned in the bare minimum of work, and always had excuses. I told him he had to improve because if he did this on the job, he'd get fired. He kept coasting, and the other profs let him get by. First teaching job? He got fired. I laughed in the privacy of my office, and I'm not sorry. Story 7. I was teaching music. I had a flutist who was fantastic. He practiced 4 hours every day and wanted to be the next James Galway, guy who does the Flutishire theme in The Lord of the Rings. Unfortunately, he had an ego the size of Texas. He told the girl next to him, who also wanted to be a professional flutist, that she was abysmal and should just go finish off herself. He refused to audition for our local honor band, which was part of his grade, because he refused to lower himself to playing with such talentless musicians. He would complain about my conduct in class when I wouldn't cue him because I was too busy cueing the low brass who needed help with their entrances, aka teaching. He refused to play a theme from a popular video game at a concert, something that we play to get people to attend, because we need that money to keep the program going. It was apparently not artistic enough. Then he refused to show up to a concert because he was embarrassed to be seen performing with his high school band. So he failed the band, and I kicked that toxic little crap out. But he was talented, and he wanted to be a flutist. So he auditioned for Juilliard and made it in. This dude quits before the first semester is over because he believed he was more talented than his teachers. He earned a symphony gig in a very well-known group, thanks to a blind audition where he wasn't permitted to talk and reveal how much of a jerk he was. That lasted 2 weeks before he dissed the very famous conductors conducting and got his butt fired. His career is dead because he couldn't keep his ego in check, and I find it immensely satisfying. Story 8. Last year I had a 7-year-old in my class who was just a pain. He's the only child I've ever taught who I've actually disliked. He would throw things around the classroom, pinch other children, stab them with pencils. He was rude to everyone and would always blame it on someone else. Talking to his parents wouldn't help because they believed everything he said, even over adults who had actually witnessed him doing it. They would give excuses and say that other children were blaming him or that he was being picked on. There was nothing wrong with this child other than he had been brought up with no consequences in his life. Anyway, one break time, he was harassing another child, and I guess they just had enough, and this usually mild-mannered child just punched him in the stomach, causing the horrible child to wet himself. When following the incident up, all of the other children who witnessed it, around 5 or 6, completely closed ranks and denied that it ever happened. I can't usually condone when children hit back. It causes so many other problems. But you better believe all the adults that have had to deal with this child were rooting for the hitter. Story 9. I teach kindergarten, and I had a terrible, terrible child in my class last year. He liked to pull his desk away from the girl sitting across from him so her pencils and crayons would go falling on the floor. Finally, one day, she got fed up and slammed her desk back into his. Unfortunately for him, his fingers happened to be there. I had to resist the urge to be like, "That's what you get." But instead, I just reminded him that that's why I said not to move his desk away from the rest of the table and sent him to the nurse. Story 10. I was in pre-K in the early 80s at a private Catholic school. This one kid, Amy, would always bite the other kids. I don't remember exactly how it went down, but I guess one day I came home crying or had a really bad bite mark or something, and my mom was pissed. She took me straight to the superintendent, not the principal, and showed her what happened. The superintendent, a really old nun, did not put up with that crap. She called Amy into her office and bit her arm. Amy started crying, but she never bit anyone again. Old nuns in the 80s were hardcore. Story 11. I taught a comparative anatomy animal dissection lab section back in college. I had one kid in a section, let's call him Kevin, who never listened to dissection instructions and just dove in with a scalpel, dicing and chopping and generally mutilating most of the internal organs. His first karmic warning came when we were dissecting squid, and he got squid juice on himself. Smelled awful for the rest of that class. However, he kept on ignoring instructions and hacking away. And this time, karmic justice struck on our very last dissection project, the fetal pig. Kevin really wanted to see the pig's brain. Kevin couldn't get through the skull, so he started whacking away at it with the butt of a flat pry knife. I told him to stop, but he had to give it one last mighty thwack. Crack! The skull breaks, and rubbery piglet brain bits come flying out everywhere, mostly over Kevin, splattering him. Unfortunately, while protesting my refusal to let him dice this piglet into pancetta cubes, Kevin had his mouth open. Thankfully, preserved pig brain, ingested orally, seemed to have a calming, subduing effect on Kevin for the last couple classes. Story 12. In high school, we had this little crap kid named Brandon. I only had one class with him, but that class is where the story happened. It was 11th grade geography, and our teacher was one of the nicer teachers I can remember. Brandon would always push her buttons like I'm sure he did to everyone. He would never take it too far. I think he just loved the attention of getting the whole class to look at him or laugh at what he was doing. He would make little noises, tell stupid jokes during lecture, pretend to sleep and snore, and any other stupid, irritating crap that you could think of. Our teacher, she was quite a patient lady, but you could tell by mid-year that she had enough of his crap as anyone. She couldn't even really punish him because Brandon loved that kind of attention, and it made him all the happier. The few times he got too much, she would give him detention and a couple times send him to the office, which just made him more giddy. We had a very tame office staff, and they would keep him in the office for an hour or something and just let him out. She tried everything, and you could tell she was at the end of her wits. A few weeks after 9/11, some kid thought it would be funny to call in a bomb threat. They cleared the school and went locker by locker. They found nothing, of course. And we went back in. As soon as we sat down in that geography class, an office staff member came into our class and went up to our teacher and whispered something into her ear. I still remember the calm look on her face. In the most professional way, she looked over at Brandon and said, "You're being called to the office." She went on with the rest of the class, completely normal. They had found quite a bit of weed in Brandon's locker, and as a result, he was expelled over it. Story 13. Not a teacher, but one time when I was in kindergarten, a kid looked me straight in the eyes, bit himself on the wrist, hard, and ran to the teacher and blamed me. They sent me to the principal's office. My mom was called down. I got yelled at and cried. A week later, the kid did it again, and the teacher saw him do it. Felt so good to have the principal apologizing profusely to me, while that little craphead got a mouthful from his parents. Story 14. Mine is a shorter one. There was a clique of the popular kids who were often jerks and acted out because, hey, that's funny in high school. Our city had a living center for the mentally ill. It also had a public swimming pool, and when we got to the swim module in the gym, that was where we headed. Well, one day there's an extremely autistic 14-year-old at the pool, like barely functioning, and he decides that it'll be funny to sit there and growl at him aggressively, like a hostile dog, because why not? Autistic kid loses his crap. He freaks right out. The kid's handler figures out what happens because someone discreetly tells her when she's wondering why her ward is losing his goddamn mind, and goes and talks to the teacher about it. Cool guy is banned from the center. He automatically fails the module. They choose to take it a step further, however, and decide that he instantly fails the gym course, losing the credits he needed to graduate, in addition to a lengthy suspension. Story 15. Park ranger here, we do this urban education initiative with some Michelle Obama money to bus inner-city kids out to a wetland. There was this one kid, let's call him Pablo, who was this third-grade classroom's funny guy. Live animal demonstration, ask about its nipples, and then repeat the word nipple louder so everyone could laugh. While we're walking, we talked about animal poop the whole time. Of course, I was professional and answered the questions because I begrudgingly know a lot about scat and nipples. Every learning opportunity for other kids, he would barge into and take everybody out of the moment. Every time I got kids excited about nature, he would do some lame peer pressure, so the vibe was, no, nature sucks. I wanted to push him into some briars pretty badly. Justice came swiftly when I was explaining poison ivy to half the group he swaggers over and does some kind of these leaves mine prank to disrupt the focus of the group. I wanted to tell him it was poison ivy, but instead told him to put it down. And the other kids were like, drop it. The reverse psychology made him caress the leaves even more, and then before he touched his face, I had to tell him what they were. Pablo then cried. His crude but cool guy persona was shattered, and everybody listened to me for the rest of the field trip. Story 16. I'm not a teacher, but I'll tell you a story anyway. There was this guy in middle school that would take craps and piss in the hallways. It was really weird, but he somehow thought it was funny, so he kept doing it. Well, I was locker buddies with this really early developed guy in middle school. He was like Hagrid big to me. Back then, I noticed the weird kid standing next to my locker but standing in front of Hagrid's locker. I'm thinking, oh crap, something's about to go down, so I waited. Hagrid gets to his locker and this kid is still standing in front of his locker. Hagrid tells him to please move out of the way because he was blocking the way. Weird kid says no and starts chuckling. All I'm thinking is, oh crap. Hagrid asks again, and still the same response. This is when Hagrid kicks this MF in the face. Like I've never seen anything like this before. This kid is standing straight up, and he lifted his leg higher than I am in height and kicked this kid in the face. Hagrid gets suspended and tells me if that kid ever bothers me to let him know so he can kick him in the face again. Story 17. One of my favorite things about being a teacher is when a child experiences natural consequences, like tripping after they refuse to stop running or accidentally hitting themselves when they are trying to flail around to get away from you. My favorite I have ever witnessed, though, was from a preschooler. He used to army crawl under the lunch tables and jump off the furniture. One day in the lunchroom, he got pissed for some unidentifiable reason. He stood rooted in one spot and screamed that he was never moving. He wanted to make a point, so he stomped as viciously as he could. He was wearing really flat-footed sandals on a hard floor and must have hit the ground with a perfectly level foot. His face was like a cartoon. His mouth made an immediate upside-down U, and he screamed like that guy on SpongeBob who yells, "My leg!" It just felt like justice to me. Story 18. I was a camp counselor, and there was this kid who was so annoying and always tried to borrow money from other campers and not give it back. Eventually, none of the campers wanted to play with him, including his only friend at camp. They came to me, and I had to tell him why his friend didn't want to play with him anymore. I encouraged him to stop scheming. He didn't learn, but I think social exclusion is enough of a punishment for him. Story 19. Unfortunately, nothing. I teach preschool, and most of my problem students either have some undiagnosed issue or a complete lack of consequences from the parents. Usually a bad combination of both. I don't want bad things to happen to them. What I'd like is for their justice to be getting the help they need more than I, as an untrained person making minimum wage, can provide. Unfortunately, that rarely happens because the parents here refuse to think something could be wrong with their angel, and I'm not allowed to imply otherwise. Story 20. Teacher's assistant for anatomy. This one student had an ego so large it could barely fit into the room. However, this individual was very intelligent and often scored near perfect on exams. They wanted to go to med school. What made this person troublesome? Every detail was a small battle they had to win. They would bring articles about how one small minute detail was incorrectly taught. 1 point off on an exam was met with highlighted notes from the book, PowerPoint, and articles on how they were correct. Mind you, the score on the exam was 99%. Karma justice. Did not get into medical school. One school emailed the pre-professional guidance counselor and told them how much of an butt this individual was during the interview. Story 21. I used to get in trouble in my 3rd grade a lot because I would lose my pencil in class. My teacher, Miss Hodges, must have thought I was a moron. One day, after yet another lost pencil, I glance over at little Miss Anita, closing her pencil box, and I glimpse my pencil in there. I screamed bloody murder at her until my teacher came over to yell at me for disrupting class. I accused Anita, who broke down crying and admitted it. Teacher took her out of class to deal with the situation. As far as I can tell, Anita was not punished, but she never stole any of my pencils again. I, however, did not get an apology from either lady. I think Miss Hodges was pissed that she had one less reason to hate me. Looking back, I think Anita was poor, and therefore got a pass. Story 22. There was a kid that was always disrupting class. I will call him Steele. He was always throwing things, pencils, staplers, books, shoes, ECT. Steele would go around and lift up girls' skirts or try to fight everyone at recess. Once Steele even stabbed a girl in the hand with a pencil and didn't even get in trouble. His mother worked at the school and they just brought her in to sit with him. Our teacher was really sweet and she always tried reasoning with him instead of sending him to the principals. Well, one day she was out and there was a substitute teacher filling in. Steele does the same stuff he did every day, and the teacher was not having it. He, substitute, sent Steele to the back of the classroom so he couldn't bother anyone. Steele then decides to climb on the table in the back of the class and begin jumping. The teacher was ignoring him, and then we all heard a crash. Steele jumped too close to the edge of the table, knocked it over, and fell down on the edge. He hit his back so hard it fractured his vertebrae. The substitute called the ambulance, and Steele and his mother were taken away. The regular teacher came back the next day, and Steele was bedridden past the end of the school year. She was one of the best teachers I had, and I'm grateful she didn't have to deal with the ambulance that day or Steele for the rest of the school year. He came back the next year and was much more calm. Story 23, volunteer Sunday school teacher here. I told the one really annoying class clown that one day he would need to listen up in class, as it might do him some good. I told him that, although it doesn't seem like it, most of his teachers in school and out want him to succeed in life. Well, he finally had a really good learning experience that due to his grades in school, he was not allowed to participate in a class trip. That Sunday, he told me that he was trying to do better because he didn't want to be left out again. So far, he is paying a whole lot more attention and actively participating. Story 24. There was a group of little craps in my freshman biology class that would constantly make fun of the teacher to the point of her leaving the class to regain her composure. This teacher was probably the best in the school, but massively overweight. A certain group of like 3 boys would nonstop harass her. They would leave chicken wings on her desk, candy bars, make noises when she walked by, and disrespect her in general. One day she took a kid out in the hallway because he did something especially offensive, and one other of the boys said, "Wouldn't it be hilarious if she came back crying?" And that finally set me off. I went off on him. I was usually pretty quiet, but I couldn't take it. He resorted to insulting my dress. Clever, I know. So I said, "Tough talk for someone wearing 80s mom jeans." He started bawling his eyes out in front of the class.
Story 1. Not my story, but a close friend from back in college. He said that in high school, in one of his classes, his teacher was very deaf and couldn't hear in one ear, and basically was very good at reading lips. Come their first exam of the year, with the teacher standing in front of the room, kids started to just bow their heads down and literally speak out loud, "What is the answer to 12?" etc., softly, of course. Apparently, soon enough, there was just constant conversation throughout the whole class regarding most questions. He said that soon enough, an assistant or another teacher would sit in during tests or quizzes once the teaching staff figured it out. I still find it incredibly amusing to picture a class of 40 kids talking during the test, with the teacher standing right up front. Story 2. Had a kid who would raise his hand and say something like, "I need help with number 13, or whatever number. I'm a teacher's assistant." Either myself or the teacher would go over to him and tell him to speak out loud, and give him whatever help he needed that we could give. I work in a special needs school, so sometimes they don't know definitions of words or struggle getting a point across if it's a short answer. It took me a few times to realize, but about 20 to 30 seconds after this student would say that, another student would sharpen his pencil manually, and he would twist the pencil either once, A, twice, B, 3 times, C, or 4, D, so that the other student could hear it. Imagine manually sharpening a pencil, that kind of click sound. The look on both of their faces when I took the sharpener away and told them to stay after class was great. Great way to cheat, though. Story 3. Not a teacher, but a story passed on by my father. When he was attending gymnasium, Germany's equivalent of a grammar school or a publicly funded prep school, history lessons were all about memorizing dates. The classroom used for history also had one large window, which the history professor usually had his back turned to while speaking to the students. This large window behind the history teacher would fog up in the winter. On one test day, some students decided to write out entire events and their dates on the window, using their fingers. The history teacher passed out the tests. The window slowly fogged up, and behold, everybody in the class could see the dates on the window, except for the professor, whose back was turned to it. Once the tests were collected, the history professor finally turned around and saw the window. All he said was, "That's good." The professor then graded the papers as normal. He must have seen too many instances of cheating that one finally impressed him. Story 4. I'm not a teacher, but 2 former professors of mine, who coincidentally shared an office, had great stories. They were both lit English professors, so they involve essays. The first was grading a student's essay and could just sense that something was off. It didn't match the rest of the student's writing. He simply emailed the student and asked him if there was anything he wanted to tell him. No accusation, but the implication was, "I know something isn't right here." The student came in at his next office hours and confessed that another student who owed him a favor had written it for him. Because he had confessed right away, the professor gave him a second chance. Redo the assignment for half credit, and he wouldn't report the student for academic dishonesty. The student soon handed in a new essay, and the professor again sensed that something was wrong, so he did a little Googling. The student had plagiarized from Wikipedia, and not just Wikipedia, but the Wikipedia entry about Wikipedia. He reported the student. The other professor had a student turn in an essay, and again, his spidey sense was tingling. A lot of the citations and quotes were too perfect. But he did some Googling and maybe turned it in and couldn't find any evidence of plagiarism. In fact, that set him on the right track. The professor went to the library to look for the books and articles the student had listed under works cited and discovered that they didn't exist. The student had fabricated the whole thing. He did such a good job at faking the citations, he probably could have done the actual assignment in the same amount of time it took him to invent his sources. Story 5. Chemistry class in high school. We had weekly labs that required a page-long summary of the procedures and results. We had groups of 4, and I was the guy in the group that did the work while the rest mostly sat around and gossiped. Sure as shit, the day the lab summary is due for one of the more technical labs, Abby finds me before class starts for the day. Chemistry is 5 hours away, and asks to borrow my summary. I told her not to copy it word for word. She agreed, and I got it back after the first class of the day. Chemistry class rolls around, and we all turn in our papers. The next day, we were working on a new lab when the teacher pulled me aside and asked me, "Did you write this paper?" I told him the truth that yes, I did. He responds with a simple okay before pulling aside each of my lab partners in turn. I don't know what they told him, but after the last interrogation, he talked to all of us. All right, spring-loaded giraffe gets an A, Abby gets a B, Charlie gets a C, and Nicole gets a D. You got those grades based on the number of spelling and punctuation errors in your paper. Turns out, Charlie copied off of Abby, and Nicole copied from Charlie, and the teacher guessed correctly. This same teacher would tell the class before each test, remember, cheating only helps your grade. Story 6. In 5th grade, we had an economics simulation where we were supposed to learn about having a successful business. We made little goods and had fake money, and at the end of the year, we could use the fake money to buy real goods in an auction. I was very bad at it. So I stole one of the stamps used to mark the money, got a date stamp, and proceeded to buy Xerox fake money, which I mixed into the real money. I kept small bills, didn't make enough to be suspicious, and changed the date stamp to dates that were consistent with the real bills. I had one accomplice. I told no one else. I wasn't caught. And I got a set of bath gels out of it at the end of the year. Surprisingly, I am now a full functioning adult and positive member of society. Story 7. My dad's a professor. When he gives tests to huge classes, he sets the students in seats according to their place alphabetically and distributes multiple forms so that no one sits next to anyone who has the same test, and he can know what test each student will be administered. Once, when he was grading, he noticed an abnormally low score, below the statistical guessing rate even. His general procedure in those cases is to check to make sure that a student didn't actually skip a bubble line on the Scantron sheet, etc. Well, this student didn't do that, but the answers were awfully similar to the correct answers to a different form. They were in fact identical to the test belonging to the person on the student's right. So my dad, being a quintessential geek, calculated the chance that the student would guess randomly the exact same as the person to their right. It was somewhere less than 1 in 2 million, and included this statistic in his academic integrity violation report. Story 8. Back in high school, our sole math teacher was horrid, and was there only on a combination of tenure, and because Jesus says it's mean to fire people. Catholic school. Going to her for extra help was of no benefit to anyone. I barely understood the math, and 50% of the senior class was flunking algebra or pre-calc. I wrote an entire, admittedly simple, software suite for the calculators we all had to carry, which would show tons of common formulas as well as do them out for you, explaining each step so you could show your work, as was always required. I had a link cable for the calc, and doled the software out to jocks and dorks alike. Grades shot up, but the teacher started getting suspicious and required everyone to wipe their calc's memory and show her the big memory cleared screen before exams. So I wrote a program to fake that screen. A few people, myself included, had their GPAs saved, and now I build online training software and job aids, cheat sheets as a career. Work smarter, not harder, kids. Story 9. When I was in high school, I had a really mellow biology teacher. A little too mellow. He was notorious for leaving the classroom during tests. It got so bad that when he left, people would just shout out questions and answers to one another. Hey, what's the answer for 41? Which has more legs, a centipede or a scorpion? I think it's a centipede. You sure? Scorpions have A lot of legs, my dude. No, centi means 100, like centimeter or century. Scorpion has like 6 or 8 or something, not 100. General murmur of agreement. There was this kid in our class named Assad, the son of some Pakistani general or something, who had some severe bully issues. Hey, punk walrus, you're the nerd here. Give me your paper. And he'd copy it. I got pretty tired of this, so I hatched a cheat of my own for the midterm. I asked the teacher if he wouldn't mind if I came in early and took the exam before school started. Then, when the second period came along, I'd turn in a complete 0 in a fake paper. He agreed to it, but made me promise not to give out the answers to anyone, and trusted me. So I did, and I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. When class came around, that kid copied my paper, and even though the teacher actually did stay in the classroom, he kind of looked the other way with a smirk when that bully put his eyes on my paper. I mean, I laid it on thick. If a multiple choice had A, B, C, or D, I'd put an E on the Scantron portion. During filling in the blanks, he was just creative. Question: name 3 types of plants. Answer: photovoltaic, nuclear power, Ford motor. He just copied it word for word. Dumb. So when it was time to get our grades, I got a B. Assad got a 0. Lowest grade I have ever seen, my teacher said. Are you trying to be sarcastic or something? For what does a mycologist study? You put my daughter's name. I'm calling your parents for a conference. This was a good 25% of our grade, and Assad was in deep shit. Of course, he was livid and stupid. He accused the teacher of fraud and incompetence. How could I have gotten a 0? Punk Walrus got a B, and I answered everything the same. I'm also going to speak to your parents about your rampant cheating and summer courses you can take to make it up. Story 10. When I was in high school, there was this kid I called Chris. Chris was by and large a typical student. No weird dress, no bullying, no extreme displays of intelligence. He wasn't popular, nor was he a pariah. Not athletic, nor the fattest kid in school. His grades? Average. Just some A's and a few B's. But that changed quickly when someone discovered his dirty little secret. He was expelled for his actions, but I found him several years later, working at a gas station, going to community college for computer science. A fitting degree given his story. Chris would go to the school on a Friday night, when everyone was at home and relaxing and enjoying themselves, sometimes around midnight. He parked his bike in the nearby streets and made his way to the school under the cover of foliage. There was a mildly wooded field near the school, and find a small back door that led into the art and music section. He'd pick the lock on the door with picks made by hand, and sneak right into the school. He would then use a specific route that was unsecured by cameras to enter into the teacher-staff offices. All one room, lots of desks, and would do all manner of tasks. He would peruse the teacher's desk. If he found the copy of the test in question, he simply took out a portable scanner and began scanning whole tests. If the tests came out of the book, he would find any relevant sections and copy them down. Tests on CDs were extremely easy, he said. He simply used PowerISO to make a bit-by-bit copy of the entire disk. But some teachers handwrote their tests. So he devised the craziest solution I have ever seen. He made a little piece of hardware that fit into the keyboards that logged every keystroke, essentially a modified, stealthier, and much smaller version of this. The result? Every week, he'd get a huge text dump of hundreds of files, and would dig through them using a find function available on any text editor, like Notepad. He could steal entire portions of tests effortlessly. Then, it was as easy as looking up the answers and memorizing them, copying them onto tests, and getting A's. The surprising bit? He actually learned the material better than many of the other, more honest kids. How was he caught, you might ask? Well, there was a design flaw in his hardware that he used to log the material. The power necessary to run the keyboard came from the power that was supplied by the USB cord. It went in a reciprocating loop. If the hardware broke down, the circuit was cut, and the keyboard could not transmit data at all. It would not even power up. The Spanish teacher who discovered his ruse took it down to IT. He thought that the keyboard needed a deep cleaning since he ate lunch and maybe some crumbs got in there. Okay, so they pop it open and they find his little chip, micro SD card and all, frayed somehow. So the principal orders the IT guy to open every single keyboard. They deduced who it was solely by the Cinderella principle. There was no other person in the school who had all those teachers besides Chris. He was expelled and sent to juvenile hall for 6 months, plus probation. In the end, the school basically revamped everything. They had cameras running 24/7 on all doors. TLDR. Former student of my high school custom built a keylogger with an 8 GB micro SD card, broke into the school, installed them in the keyboards, and came back periodically to steal info for tests. Story 11. Not a teacher, but the best cheating story I know. So there were a bunch of kids in my high school who you wouldn't see in any class in the whole semester, but they would just turn up for the exam. Everyone knows someone like that in high school. Anyways, this one kid, let's call him Dave, shows up to an English exam. He somehow gets someone to pretty much do the whole exam for him, essay and everything, and he somehow manages to have them pass all of the answers to him. And all he has to do is staple the answers to the question sheet and hand it in. So halfway through the exam, he walks up and hands in his work. The teacher takes it, turns it around, and reads aloud, "Pass this to Dave." Silence for 3 seconds. Teacher looks right at Dave. Dave looks at teacher, and all he can say is, Story 12. I went to a private school that used the Abeka curriculum, so all of our tests were prescribed and torn out of a book. The school would order one book of tests for each student enrolled that year. At the beginning of the year, our class managed to get a hold of one of the test books. Not the answer key, just one of the books with all the tests in it. Before every test or quiz, they would distribute the blank one to me or the other nerdy kid in class. We split the test between ourselves, and the night before the test, we would research and answer the questions ourselves, then bring it to school for the rest of the class. The administration soon realized something was up because these other kids weren't too bright, never put much effort into the rest of their studies, and weren't smart enough to mix up their answers so as to not get every single one correct. Not to mention the teacher wasn't actually teaching the class. But that's another story. They had the entire class retake the test on the spot. Fortunately, because we were the ones who did the actual studying, and because we would learn the material instead of memorizing the answers, me and the other nerdy kid were the only ones who could replace our scores. So, they figured there must be cheating going on. Now, I should point out, I was very unpopular in school, never had anyone to sit with, and was always picked on or made fun of by the same kids who were happy to use me come test time. When Judgment Day arrived the day after the retake, the teacher pointed out that only 2 of us got the same score on the test. Then he basically says, "Only 2 of you got the same score. And she has no friends and always sits by herself, so we know it isn't her." It was so humiliating, but bittersweet. I didn't get busted and never helped anyone cheat again. Story 13. Not a teacher, but similar story. In stats, a friend thought he could sneak in a burrito and eat it by holding it behind a movable closet that was situated against the wall he was sitting near. When the teacher wasn't looking, he'd bring it out and take a bite. When the teacher was looking his way, he'd discreetly hide it behind the closet, and since he was close enough, it didn't look suspicious. Teacher is at the board talking about z-scores and statistical nonsense, and out of nowhere says, "And Cam, throw away that burrito. You know there's no food in my classroom." It turns out, people have tried to use the closet in the same way in past years, so he set up an unsuspicious mirror in the back. It looked like one you'd see in any classroom, to spy on people sneaking food in. Imagine the look on our faces when we thought he could see through walls. Story 14. I'm not a teacher, but yesterday my history class was taking a test, and the girl who sits next to me, she moved to the US from France a few months ago, doesn't speak very good English, and generally seems to be the typical hot dumb blonde type, took out a juice box. Then she opened up a small flap she had cut on one of the sides of the box and revealed the screen of an iPod Nano, the tiny new kind with the touchscreen. She somehow emptied out the box, put her iPod inside, cut out a perfect area for the screen, and resealed it so it looked like new. For the entire period, I watched her scroll through notes on it and ace the test, by the looks of it, while I could barely answer a single question. But then, as she walked by my desk to turn in her test, she placed the juice box on my test. All the notes were written in perfect English and included stuff I doubt even the smartest kid in the class knew. Today, our tests were passed back, and she high-fived me when she saw we both got 100%. French girls, man. TLDR. The harebrained French girl in my history class is secretly a juicebox genius.